a true Thunderbird mindset, career, and approach. So currently you're in Washington, D.C., but from means of Korea. So a proven track record, over 14 years of experience. And Gbemi's going to talk to us about having grit and tenacity to achieve your career goals, which is ultimately exactly to where you are right now, a true Thunderbird mindset. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Gbemi. And again, if there's any questions, I will be monitoring the chat, so you can put them in the chat and I will interject when appropriate, or you can save them to the end and then we'll let you take yourself off mute and you can ask questions then. So Gbemi, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Matthew. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the chance to speak with, or to present to you. I recall being a student myself and going through some of these. And so my hope is make this completely like a dialogue. If at any point you have questions, you have concerns, you want to hop in, please don't wait necessarily till the end if you have that burning desire to speak. So I'm very open, kind of looking forward to having this be a dialogue and ensuring that everyone on the call or who listens to this afterwards gets as much value as they can from it. So as Matthew mentioned, my name is Gbemi Disu. I work as the Chief Business Officer at George Mason University in South Korea. My role encompasses overseeing our finance, HR, emergency health and safety. I also oversee our external relations, so government relations, PR. I have about 9 departments that I oversee at the institution, so it's a bit of a busy job and requires quite a bit of grit in most days. And in a typical sort of MBA way, I know we like the 4 C's and all those different, so I came up with which we know, the 5 W's. So that's who I am. What do I do? When did I decide on my path? And the answer is, there was never a conscious decision, and that's what I'll go into as to how you navigate your career. I actually started at Thunderbird with the expectation that I would go into international development. I was an international student, and at that point, I decided that that's what my passion was, that's what I wanted to do, but that very quickly evolved and I ended up going instead into the corporate sector, working in finance and oil and gas, and then eventually coming back and working in higher education. So in terms of when did I decide, my path has sort of been an evolving journey, and I've mostly had 2 factors in my mind when I think about what step I want to take in my career. I'm always focused on, am I going to learn something new? Am I going to cultivate any new skill set? And ultimately, am I going to have fun? And so they seem very basic, but it, for me, have served to be very helpful tools in deciding what step I move my career in. So why am I talking to you? Because I am you. I'm a T-Bird, graduated class of 06. I was an international student, so came to Thunderbird on an F1 visa. So I understand some of the challenges that some students might be facing if you're an international student. Was at that time we still had the MBA, and at that I was one of, I believe, 3 to 5 students that were brought in. I didn't have a wealth of experience in terms of professional experience. I'd interned, I'd worked at the Arizona legislature, and while I was there, I happened to meet a senator at that point who was also a Thunderbird grad. And so instead of just giving 110, I had the opportunity to work with the Speaker of the House and met that senator, and he talked to me a lot about the institution and got me very excited, and I applied, and I believe he wrote my reference back then. And so serendipitously, I ended up attending Thunderbird and being allowed to come in, even though I didn't have like the 5 to 10 years of work experience that a lot of people had. And I mentioned this because that came with its challenge as well as its opportunity. So obviously there's a challenge with your classmates because you have to establish credibility and articulate why you're in the classroom even though you didn't have these decades of experience. And how I chose to overcome that was really focusing on 3 things: academic, leadership, and service. So I really ensured that, and for me it was a little bit easier because I was not that far out of my undergraduate degree. Academics were not as much of a challenge for me. So I ended up bringing that level of experience to the table because a lot of my classmates hadn't been in school for a really long time. And so I ended up being valuable to them and teaching them sort of how to navigate academics and transition back into that world. So from day one already seeing how I could add value in a way that some of them didn't have. Secondly, leadership, I got involved from day one. I ran for student body president. I got involved in so many leadership things with the notion of thinking that I have to compete with people who have 10 to 20 years worth of experience, both at Thunderbird, but also externally for jobs. So I need to demonstrate that I had built these skill sets that companies were looking for in terms of what is useful for the role that I would be applying for. So definitely worked on leadership and experience. And then service, that was just sort of intrinsically my passion, but I also had helped start the Thunderbird Cares Day in 2005, and which I believe has been institutionalized and continued. And it was such a great opportunity for faculty, staff, and students to give back to the community, which also, even though that wasn't my initial reason for starting, became a talking point and demonstrated that I had leadership in different ways to companies when I was also job searching. So where should you go from here? That's going to be an individual path. My hope is to give you tools and kind of a platform where you can air some of your concerns or challenges that you're anticipating, but hopefully that you leave this presentation with a sense of hope, and that you understand that we all have different challenges and their different complexities, both macro, micro, and personal, that might be creating some barriers for where you hope to be. But my goal is to share how I overcame it, and hope that from there you can develop your own tools, but also feel inspired to like just keep up with the challenge and overcome it, so you too can achieve your level of career success. So I'll set the stage, and obviously in school we learn not to make these kind of PowerPoint slides, so it's way too packed, so just bear with me. I'll go through these pretty quickly. So I call this a bit of like the hard truths, and so I'll start up with just saying, and someone at some point shared some of this with me, and some of these I came to the realization on my own. A graduate degree is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. And I say this because I had a few classmates who came in with this notion thinking, I have an MBA, I'm going to be like the hottest commodity on the market, everybody wants me. Maybe, but in reality, there's you and 800 million other people who have this degree, and it's so important that you think about why you came to get the MBA, and to really think about if the behaviors that you're exhibiting at the institution are really aligned with your reasons. So we had some people who were going to start a family business, and so their rationale was they wanted to make connections, they had different reasons for why they were coming. There were some that wanted this to be a career change. So maybe they'd been working in marketing and wanted to switch to finance. And I say it's important to start thinking about this, because at that point, if that's the case, then don't fall back and take marketing classes and engage only in things if your goal was originally to then pivot your career to something else. So think about a graduate degree as a conduit for what you plan to do, but having that degree in itself, we all know how much you pay for the degree, it's expensive, but that's in itself is not alone, it's not good enough to just be out in the marketplace. It has to be the degree plus plus, and that's what I'll explain in terms of how I sort of focused my my approach to getting that degree. It's a fantastic degree, proudly T-Bird, can't imagine going anywhere else, but ultimately it's what you do with the degree that matters, not just that you graduated from Thunderbird with that degree. And I also say comparison is the thief of joy, right? So things are not always going to be fair. I know even in my set, we would always talk about, oh, this person got this job because they happen to be at this place at this right time. Yes, sometimes life happens that way. And so if you sit there and you compare yourself to other people versus really focusing on your own reality and what you have control over, you're going to get easily dejected and not have that resilience to navigate when things are a challenge for you. It's really key to understand that you don't deserve anything and nobody owes you anything in terms of how you approach people. If you want to set up networking relationships, in terms of when you connect to people, in terms of your classmates, your professors, you have to earn everything that you get from grad school. And so, or anything you do in general. If you just keep that in mind, it'll really make yourself grateful for when those connections pan out, but really make you work harder ensuring that you build that platform for yourself. Hope is not a strategy that I think most people have heard. I hope to get this job. I hope to do this. If you actually want to achieve those things, it's really important that you think about having a plan and then putting in the work and then that you have to do to get the best of all the roles that you have. So it's good to have aspirations, but you can't just be based on that. You really have to think about, if this is where you want to be, what are the steps that will get you there? And it's absolutely possible that you do everything right and things don't work out. So that's where that grit and tenacity happens. I had classmates who like did all the right things, took all the right classes, and just had a really hard time landing those jobs. For some of them, it was because they were international. For some of them, it was a geographic challenge. Some of them would make it to the first or second round, to the final rounds of the interview and just not get picked. So it's easy to get rejected once again, but that's where that grit and tenacity works out. The fact that you made it that far should be inspirational. It's just now, can you tweak your approach to see how you actually close the deal? So some of these sound like I read a Tony Robbins book. It's all about you're not made to survive, you have to thrive. But I think it's important to remind yourself about a lot of these. But also for me, it's celebrating milestones. So even though your goal had been X, if you get to W, you should sort of celebrate that, because having these micro successes really gives you the energy and the ability to keep working towards your bigger goal, versus if you're only waiting to celebrate once you get to the long term, you'll probably fall off the radar at some point because you put all your eggs on that basket and you're not rewarding yourself in a reasonable way on your way to do that. I also always say, think about what a realistic stretch goal is versus a pie in the sky goal. So I've had people depending on, so I was very realistic about, I came in understanding that I didn't have 10 years of work experience. So I didn't come out of my MBA thinking I was going to land the first 300,000 job that Goldman Sachs was going to offer. I thought about the fact that, what do I bring to the table? What's a realistic stretch goal? And how do I get that pie in the sky, but knowing that there'll be multiple steps in between. But I always left room for luck, and I'll explain how I ended up working at HSBC, because as long as you were prepared and you did the right things, there's a chance that luck will get you that pie in the sky goal, even when you weren't planning it. But it is for your own mental well-being and for how you approach your career search to really have realistic stretch goals, taking into account what your limitations are and how can you overcome those. So I always say that give yourself time to have a pity party when things don't go your way. It's perfectly normal, but really you have to sort of buckle up from that and transition into an action plan. For example, everyone has those challenges. And once again, speaking as a foreign student at that point, I really had to think about what unique skills did I bring to the table that would flip the odds, because there weren't that many companies that were willing to file for visas at that time. And mind you, I kind of graduated around the same time that the financial crisis was hitting. So it was a very interesting time as an international student, but also as a job seeker in general. So setting that stage, just sort of giving you sort of the mindset that I was in, but also how you should start thinking about what the rest of my presentation looks like. I just thought I would get that out of the way. Hopefully no one's dropped off yet because they're scared. So just hang with me. There is a rainbow at the end of this. So as I say, being a T-Bird, we're all born to be global rock stars, right? And I actually do think that T-Bird gives you those tools. And because the same skills you need to approach your job and success in your job and career success overall are the same skills we are taught when it comes to being global bridgers. So according to the book Being Global, which was written by the former T-Bird president, as well as a former faculty, Greg Unruh, global leaders are able to create, connect, and contribute. And so if you think about that as you're approaching your job, that global mindset allows you to connect with individuals. That's where that networking comes through for jobs. That entrepreneurial spirit helps you create value. So how do you take creative approaches to job seeking, or how you're going to look for a list of jobs? Are you looking just at LinkedIn or going through the CDC, or are you thinking about other creative ways you can leverage those connections? And then you have to make a positive contribution, right? So nobody just wants to be seen as, I get sometimes emails from other people, certainly not T-Birds, they're very transactional. And to be successful in your job search, you have to think about it as relational versus transactional. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But because I'm such a nerd and I love school so much, I'll walk you through your job search in the same way, in a language that maybe will appeal to different people versus kind of what I've been discussing so far. So let's assume you're going to approach this for those who are in consulting class. Think of your job as a new market entry, and then you would run a pestle analysis, right? So in this case, P would be, look at the political climate in which you're seeking employment. Is it a stable location? What are the trends? What are the tax implications? Does that work for you as the individual? So I might want to go get a job in Dubai because there you get to have there's no income tax. There's this. So think about your personal situation and the political environment in which you're looking for a job and see if that makes sense for you. What's the job market like, right? What are the economic indicators? What are the salaries there? So I could want a job in maybe I want to go live on a Caribbean island. At the salaries being paid on the Caribbean island, despite all the sunshine, able to help me make enough income to pay off my student loans, right? So start thinking about what is the demographic of the country that you're moving into. Are there jobs there? Does it have a young population? Is there an aging population? So look at the job market. When you're narrowing down in terms of countries that you want to work in, what makes sense, and help that sort of bounce your aspirations against the reality of what that market looks like. What are some cultural barriers you might face, and what are the career attitudes? I had a friend in college who was very driven, was from New York, and moved to Norway. And while she was there, she encountered some social norms where it's more of a relational culture and more about community. And so she always struggled because as from New York, she always wanted to sort of work at a certain pace and stand out. And she had her manager say, in Norway, this isn't quite how we approach it. And you either have to sort of adapt to the different norms of our culture, or you're going to struggle with being successful. So really understanding what are some cultural barriers that you might face. For example, also for some, there might be some things about religion that impact where you want to go. So think about yourself, not that you can't navigate it, but what are your priorities when you're thinking about that? Technology, there's some skills. I mean, I know that we talk a lot about the fourth industrial revolution, and there's some technical skills that you can possess that could give you an edge. If you want to work in, if you're trying to work in private equity, maybe there's a tool there that you can bring to the table. If you want to work in fundraising for a nonprofit, have you learned how to use Razor's Edge or Salesforce? Or so think about what job you're looking for. If there's some technical skills that you can get some training on, that will give you an edge in the job market. Mostly, obviously, in a traditional pestle analysis refers to environmental, but I like to think of it more in ethical as well. So does the company value match yours? And is the environment safe and steady where you're looking for that job? So if you're anti-smoking, then you probably don't want to work for Philip Morris. So just to think about what are the values of the company, because as much as they're interviewing you, you're interviewing them. And you don't want to work for somewhere where your values are not aligned, because likely you won't be able to have sustainable success at that organization. And then L is for the legal framework. And there are legal circumstances that provide some challenges for you, as there are discrimination laws. For example, I had a friend who wanted to work in the Middle East and wanted to move with his partner, but his partner wasn't able to get all the sort of health benefits and different things. So really think about your individual needs and see if you would have any of those constraints depending on where you're looking to move to. So that's pestle. But if your thing is in consulting, maybe it's project management. So then think about managing your triple constraints. What is the scope, time, and cost to ensure that you end up with the job of your dreams? You can't apply to 1,000 jobs a day. So think about the scope of, measure things out, maybe have a calendar, think how much time you have, and think how much money you have to invest in this. And that can be an approach that you use for your career search to help you get to success. Or you take an accounting approach. What's the balance sheet? What are your assets? So what are the skill sets and things you bring to the table? What are your liabilities? Where are there expectation and performance gaps that you have? And then what do you have any social capital? Do you have any connections that can help you get into these roles? Or you look at finance or risk. Diversify your risk. Don't just bank on one internship. You may need to give yourself a contingency plan. One of my favorite things, and I'll go a bit deeper into it, is marketing. Think about managing your brand. Do you understand what value you are in the organization? And are you presenting yourself in a job interview in a way that helps the company see what you're worth in terms of your value? Or in Leclerc's class, right? He teaches about BATNA. When you're going into a career search, always think about your best alternative best agreement to no alternative, to no agreement. That's alternative to no agreement. It's a mouthful, right? And so basically, if you're going in and if they offer you this level, either salary or compensation or title, you have to know going into it, what are you willing to accept to have a big picture about getting your job. And then I ended up taking a role in Six Sigma right after Thunderbird. And so it's really looking at how do you continuously improve, analyze, and adjust. So if you've been doing the same thing for your job search for a few months and you're not getting any results, you might want to stop and review your scorecard and see, are you really presenting yourself in the right way? Should you go back to the CMC and get their input on how you're describing your skills? Do you need to acquire new skills to actually get to where you want to go? So no matter which tends to float your boat, this is just a different way of thinking of your job search that worked for different people that I know as well as myself when you're at the beginning trying to navigate this very complex process. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, so I'll jump into the personal branding. Obviously, this isn't a branding class, so you've all learned this if you've taken some of the basic marketing class. But of course, a brand is sort of your name, term, symbol. We can, everyone, I say the word Mercedes-Benz, certain images come to your mind. Something that's key is to think about the fact that a brand is your most valuable asset of any corporation, right? So a market cap on like something like Coca-Cola is like hundreds of millions of dollars, right? What you need to think about that is to think of yourself as a brand, which means the qualities of a brand, which means you should be memorable, authentic, and you should have a differentiation. So if you start to think of yourself as that brand, I think this helps you when you're approaching your career as well. But first, to know what your brand is, you need to understand who you are. So some of you may have seen this before, but I really like to do this Venn diagram when I talk about personal branding. You have to look at what your passions and interests are, what are your skills, and where are their jobs. And so this always makes, so there could be, I could be passionate about flying an airplane, but I don't know how to do that. And even though there's a market for that, that doesn't work. So the intersection of what makes you happy, which seems like a nebulous moving target, but it's really important. I know when you're looking for a job, it's like, I just want a job. But ultimately, I told a friend of mine who wanted to get into iBanking, when I was at the bank, people wake up and sleep, drink, breathe, every day the stock market. They're checking. If you can't bring that level of passion to it, you're going to fall behind. And eventually, if you know, in worlds of consulting or highly competitive roles, it's a pyramid. And so only they might bring in a lot of people, but if you don't consistently have that passion, then you drop off as your career moves up. So you really should look at that. If something brings you joy, but there are no jobs at it, there are no jobs, then that's just a hobby because someone's not going to pay you for that. So it's not enough to actually have something that makes you happy and you're good at it if there's no opportunity for that, if your end goal is to have a job. So somewhere with the intersection of what your strengths are, what you're passionate about, and where there are job opportunities is hopefully how you build your brand to sort of market to the world that this is who you are and here's how you can provide value to the company. And half of this is perception. A lot of people think that they know what their brand is, and 50% of people believe that they live in this brand. But honestly, the data shows that less than 15% of people actually have a defined brand, and even worse, only 5% are living that brand consistently at the workplace. So if you start this early, as you're looking at jobs, you're already going to be way ahead of the curve. And the components, it sounds really basic, and we should all know this. I trust that our CDC team has taught you all about this, but it's appearance, right? Like some people, a friend of mine who I will not name, would go and she didn't realize that how she was approaching it that instantly put people off in terms of she had a really overwhelming perfume. So there's some basic things where if the person is distracted, we've talked about the kind of jewelry you wear, don't wear things that are going to distract people from listening to you, because we learned that nonverbal cues are about 55% of what people pay attention to. You have to also look at your social networking. What's your social capital? What are the professional relationships? I had friends who were had a little too much fun at the pub and then would call me to possibly be their reference at a job. And while I had a great time with them, I was scared to put my name behind a referral for them for a job, because that also reflects on my brand. So as you're navigating and building these relationships, also know that in the future, people are going to think of you in a particular setting. So you want to always guide that professional. If you're always late to class, if you never show up to group projects, you're already establishing what that brand is, and you never know when you're going to need your classmates or professors to be a reference, or it's really a small world. At some point that could come back to get you. So think about how you're building your social capital, even when we're in a safe space like our graduate school. Technology, as we've seen, there's so many stories of people whose jobs have been rescinded because of things they posted online. There was a story, I think it was the girl at NASA who was unprofessional. So think about what you're posting. Lots of HR, I oversee human resources. We do look online. We are looking at people's social media footprint. So your digital footprint is really key in today's world, that you manage all of that, because that has to be consistent with the brand that you're projecting on your resume or in person. So those are components that I really think is key for you to start thinking about. And most people do, but they don't think about how all of this has to align with what they think of themselves. But don't confuse your personal identity with your brand. So you see yourself differently, and that's your personal identity. And sometimes it aligns, but it's how people see you and how you're manifesting. That's really what your brand is. And why does it matter? Well, according to Forbes, it's not personal brand is not actually an option. It's a powerful leadership success enabler. So if you want to have that career success, you really have to think about building that brand, but continuing to be consistent with that brand as you move along in your career. So just a quick recap of the branding piece. You want to build your brand, you have to have self-awareness, you have to have action, and you have to be accountable. You only get a chance at a good first impression, so it's really important that you make a good one. And you don't, unfortunately, get a break from your brand. You can't decide today to be a professional and then the next day to not. You have to define what that brand is and live it every day. So that's why it's so important for you to define it in an authentic way, so that you don't feel like you're putting on a different show each day that helps you not do that. You always want to be professional and polished. So when in doubt, just probably best to avoid it in terms of how you appear for interviews, what you post online. If anything gives you a pause for concern, likely that it will create some troubles down the line. So it's just easier to avoid it. And just a reminder that you are the CEO of you, right? So from my finance person, you're your greatest asset. You want to invest it, and you want to be intentional, almost as much as if you're managing your own stock portfolio. So job search, right? I know it creates all manners of feelings. Sometimes surprised that the job of your dream is out there. Sometimes it's stress. Sometimes you're irritated that you can't get access to the information you want, or you're not getting bites. Sometimes it manifests in sickness. You're traveling so much, interviewing all over the place, and sometimes you're just sick and tired of it. So how do you navigate all of this and make sure that you maintain that tenacity and grit to actually ensure that you have successful outcome? Well, going to T-Bird, the school is over there to create creative problem solvers. And I love this quote by Henry Ford that says, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And it's true. So if you go into it saying, this is hopeless, I'm not going to get this job, I've tried 30 interviews, that mindset psychologically is going to start impacting your ability to have that tenacity to navigate these different disappointments that you may have encountered. So I won't go into these, but I love the slide. Everyone's seen them. It's all who I call the famous failures. And I think if we mention Einstein, Jordan, Disney, Jobs, Oprah, the Beatles, everyone just thinks of who they are now, but each of them has suffered major crucibles, both in their professional and in their personal lives, but they were able to have that tenacity and grit to overcome that. And now these are household names that we associate with success, but truly had magnificent failures in their career, both at different stages of their lives. So getting into like grit, what would you define it? So Webster defines it as a firmness of mind or spirit, or an unyielding courage in the face of hardship. So I think we can all agree that searching for jobs is hard, unless you have some amazing connections or you're taking over something. Either way, you have to focus on something most people struggle to find that job or to navigate that job market. I really like the definition by the U.S. Department of Education, and you can Google this report that they put out. It's a very comprehensive report. If you want to learn sort of how grit, tenacity, and perseverance are critical factors for success in the 21st century. So on page 15 of that report, it defines grit as perseverance to accomplish long-term or higher order goals in the face of challenges and setbacks. Engaging the students' psychological resources, such as their academic mindset, effortful control strategies, and tactics. So that's a bit more of an embellishment on the Webster Dictionary definition, but ultimately a word that should be resonating is that there will be challenges, there will be setbacks, and you have resources. So it's how you navigate, how you understand that this is going to be there, but you also have a way out that I'm hoping people will take out of my presentation today. So how do you cultivate grit, tenacity, perseverance? One, you have to develop courage. And courage in that you have to, not that you don't feel fear at the fact that you're going for a job interview, you're nervous, it's finding a way to embrace that fear so that it doesn't cripple you, but rather you find a way to nervous energy. I mean, I remember watching a thing just with the Super Bowl halftime, and people asked J-Lo how she felt, and she's like, of course I felt nervous, but I harnessed that energy into pouring it out on stage. So you will be nervous, but you do have to have develop courage, and that doesn't make it debilitating, and you're unable to sort of perform at your best. I also love this notion of you have to be focused on achievement versus then just being dependable. So dependable means fine, you'll show up, but achievement means you're driven by something more. And most companies are looking for people who can do that. So your ability to demonstrate that you have an achievement orientation is really key to cultivating grit, because dependability will only take you so far. You have to have endurance, and you have to have follow through. So even though something doesn't happen, I had a friend who, I think it was 3 years later, she got contacted by one of the major companies for a job she had applied for 3 years. In the meantime, she had taken another job, but she had always kept in touch with the recruiter that she met at, I think it was the Nabimba, I think it was. And then she just would send emails once a year to say, hello, I read this about your company. I saw that you IPO'd today. She would just find a reason to touch base with that recruiter every couple, I think she did it maybe once or every 6 months or something. But for some reason, she was still in their mind frame because she had been consistent with them and just had the endurance to say she ultimately wanted to work for that company. You have to be resilient. So it means you have to have a level of optimism that what you want will happen, even though it may not be on the timeline that you were hoping for, which also goes with having confidence when you approach it, but also creativity. So this notion of sending an email for happy holidays, it's just a way that she was trying to be creative to always remember, so that this recruiter didn't forget who she was. Then you focus on excellence versus perfection. In academia, we talk a lot about analysis paralysis. So the keys, whether don't worry about having that perfect resume, don't worry about interviewing perfectly. The keys, learn from whatever mistakes you made, keep moving towards the notion of excellence versus trying to have the perfect answer to everything. So sometimes even in interviews, they'll say, take a pause and collect yourself, think about it. And in that regard, you're then focusing on excellence, not having this perfect answer. So, grit in action just means you have the capacity to make these realistic plans, and then you have the strength to sort of carry them out. You have to have a positive view of yourself, because if you don't, how is someone supposed to believe that about you if you're not projecting that level of confidence and strength? You also have to have problem solving. That's the only way between us and the robots these days, is you have to bring something to the table, right? So if you're in a job that's routine, or you don't have the ability to think creatively or to analyze things, I hire lots of people, and they're more used to me having to tell them what to do. And so we're working on how do I help them develop those problem solving skills. And a lot of companies are seeking that these days. And then you have the capacity to sort of mitigate your feelings and try and understand what they are, respect them for what they are, but push past that and your impulse to kind of move forward. So I love these quotes. So I put one by Darwin that just says, it's not the strongest that survive, not the most intelligent, is the one that's most adaptable to change. So sometimes things happen, interviews get changed, your ability to sort of still compose yourself. I had a company, I think it was Deutsche Post World Net, and they really enjoyed throwing a wrench in plans, and mostly their goal in that interview was to see how people respond, and if they're going to respond negatively when things are not going the way as planned. So that's also a thing. We live in a very dynamic world. I think our executive education calls it the VUCA world. And so if you're not able to navigate these volatilities, you're not going to survive. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If every time there's something that's not going the way you plan, you can't sort of navigate that, and you're going to have a challenge in professional careers. And here just some more about some other famous failures. Michael Jordan, Nelson Mandela, who wanted to be judged. So how many times he picked himself up and how many times he fell down and picked himself up. And we know he did over 27 years and still was able to overcome his personal crucible and thrive. So if they can do it, I have full confidence that we can do it too. So just to remember, I think the key to understanding how you build this, but also you have grit and tenacity is you're not alone. Like, I think some of the fears, you think you're the only one going through that, but most likely your classmates are going through that, other MBAs or master's program students, other graduates are going through that. So everyone's going through this sense of like a little bit of fear, a little bit of nervousness. So if you just know that you're not the only one, it doesn't feel too overwhelming. And I really encourage you to leverage institutional resources. Like how I got my job is really funny because I had already secured an internship with Chevron Texaco, and I had a full-time job offer a year before I graduated, and I felt very lucky. And I really didn't have to like stress during the semester because I was really excited about my offer. But I still wanted to, I was used to giving back and working. So I volunteered to be, to work for the CMC as one of the career fair liaisons. And I didn't have to, I wasn't looking for a job. I just was like, I'm used to doing this. I've done this every semester. Why not do it again? So while I'm there, I'm walking around and I run into HSBC, which is one of the largest global banks. And I grew up in the UK, and so I had seen this brand, their ads. And so I stopped by the booth just in between the break to talk to the recruiter and say, oh my God, I love your marketing profile. And he was like, oh, you know a lot about us. Did you, are you interviewing with us? Well, I said, no, I didn't even realize they were coming because at that point they had not opted for international students. They only wanted to hire domestically. And so I'd never seen that they even posted a job. He was like, you should interview. So out of the blue, I ended up getting this random offer. That's the luck I was talking to you about. And it was just because I happened to be at an institutional event that we had at Thunderbird. And they flew out 6 of us. 5 of them were kind of pissed because I wasn't even on the list for the initial interview. End up getting the job, and that's the job I ended up picking over my other role. So that's that. Leave space for luck, but also be prepared and work hard. So when that luck comes around, you're ready to sort of hit the ground running. Build strong support networks. Thunderbird is amazing for that. So I knew I would always search online to see who's a T-Bird I know where. Even in my career now, when I first moved to Korea, I immediately contacted all the T-Birds there, and they were so helpful in helping me transition. We went to First Tuesday, and so the Thunderbird network continues to be for me one of the most valuable things that going to a school like this offers. So look about even your own family and friends when you're having a tough time. Just have somebody there who can listen to you. And but I also think leveraging the alumni network or even your peers can help you a lot. And put things in perspective. Life, as I said, life doesn't always work the way you want, but at the end of the day, things could always be worse, I guess. And so if you just think about, okay, this didn't go my way, but I want to think about moving forward, I think that's always a great perspective to have. Your mental and physical well-being is so key, especially these days. There's a whole lot of focus on well-being because if you're not at your best, you're not going to interview well. If you don't sleep the night before an interview, I know everyone says it, but it's true. And so if you don't give yourself all the best tools, you're not going to show up in the best way possible. And as I just to remember to celebrate those milestones, I celebrated getting that interview and then celebrated when I got the job offer. And there will be crucible. It's almost impossible for you to make it through life and be successful if you haven't had to overcome some challenges. So just think about when you've done that and how you got the strength to overcome it, and that'll give you sort of the courage to continue to know that you can trust yourself to do it again. So I think that's most of me talking. I wanted to kind of get through that and then leave it open for any questions or comments. And I gave my email. You can always reach out to me if you have questions too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gbemi. And I'm going to open it up here for questions. Feel free, you could write them in the chat, or you could take yourself off mute and ask Gbemi a question over the line. So I'll give it a quick second here. And I'll kind of start off because I have a question for you actually.
Okay.
But you talked about, finding a reason to touch base with somebody, and again, grit and tenacity and action, they all go hand in hand. What's your way to kind of organize yourself with the networking piece, or with the way to follow up with somebody? You mentioned that she reached out once a year. Right. Kind of the networking plan, or how do you focus on that? How do you go about it?
Right. So I think if you think in the context of relational, you categorize people into different categories, right? So when I've done fundraising at a point, you have some of your high net worth individuals. So significant people who are high up in an organization who don't have time to sort of be there for you all the time. So with them, the touch has to be high impact if it's fair. So one of the people I'm still in touch with that I've met for many years is Ambassador Barbara Barrett. And I don't send her emails with every ridiculous thought I have in my mind, because that's a network. She's very busy. A lot of people reach out to her, but I do have it in my calendar. I know when her birthday is, or if I see something in the newspaper that comes up with her name on it, then I read it, and I use that as a way to reach out and just kind of show, even when you don't need anything, to touch base with the person and show that you care. So I think my plan is usually to put people in different categories. There's some, if it's like a mid-level manager who I've built a kind of rapport with and I feel more comfortable, the kind of interaction with that person would be different. But it helps. We all have, everyone walks around with their cell phones. I remember when I was in front, people were like, oh, you remember? I don't remember anything. I use my tools very well. So I just make notes to myself, and I set these reminders in Outlook that I set. So once a year, remember to contact this person. So it's a lot of work at that moment, but then ultimately you can forget about it for the rest of the year until you're prompted by your thing to do it. So I put their email, and I copied the last email I sent into my Outlook. And then when it reminds me, I have that as a refresher to look at what was my last interaction with them. You can also set a lot of Google alerts. So it depends on what this relationship is. You can set alerts for companies, or you can set it for individual names. So with companies, it was just, I would Google and see what's the latest information with that company. So if I was looking to have a contact at Delta, for example, and very recently I saw Delta made a killing in their year end, and their company and their CEO is choosing to give these very generous bonuses. So I just send my contact, I say, hey, I saw you guys did really well. Hope you're enjoying that bonus, so, and just find a human element. At the end of the day, these are people. So finding ways to connect with them, finding areas of mutual understanding. There was a recruiter who I knew who was a Chelsea fan, and I was a Manchester United fan. So anytime we would play, at the end of the day, it's not always has to be work, but you have to establish that level of trust, right? And understand the kind of relationship. So if you don't have that over years, you might build that with the person, but in the short term, it's really focusing on them knowing that you're still engaged and you're looking. So I would always check what's going on with the stock price. I'll see what's going on with their competitors. I would just basically set an alert for companies I'm truly interested in, or look up on LinkedIn and see what's new, and you can follow the company. And so use that to just show that I'm interested, I've done my research, and I really care about becoming a part of this team.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it goes such a long way, even just that, having a little Outlook reminder for yourself. But in business, a year's not that long of a time. So
No.
being able to reach out, especially to somebody, you know, of that level,
Right.
just keeping you top of mind for them.
Yep.
You know, if it's once a year, or, you know,
Right.
if there's somebody more of a mentor style who you
Yep.
reach out to every month, every quarter, whatever.
Right.
That's,
And if it's more, I agree. If it's a mentor, what I found is it's also provided them updates, right? So they also want to see that their time is an investment. Oh, I moved jobs today, or this, you know, something there. You're just giving little tidbits that it's not always like, oh, help me, I'm like in this critical moment. So mostly if you continue to do that, when you are in the critical moment, that the mentor is really invested in you in that way. So I've had lots of people who reach out to me, and I'm probably a lot more sympathetic than my friends because I know what a challenge it is. But I've had friends be like, oh, they like just contact me directly asking for a job, nothing. Everyone knows that's not the right approach, right? Like it's
yeah.
a long game, right? So you have to instantly find a source of connection. Or first, it never hurts to say, hi, I would like an informational interview. I would like to learn more about X. So don't expect us to do the work. Don't shoot me your resume initially. Like, so there's some critical steps I know we teach at Thunderbird, but I think when people are desperate, they just want to like spam out. And it's really you're wasting your time. It's better to have more tailored. So I always say have like each week, treat it like a class. So just schedule time on your calendar and make it sort of bite-sized goals. So I always tell the people that I mentor either through the Student Women Business MBA group is maybe it's 3 things. Make a new connection each week, apply for one job, research a company. If you just say once a week, you're gonna block out like 2-3 hours a day to do those 3 things every week and not wait till when time is there, but start it from day one. Make a connection, so get on LinkedIn, look up a company, get someone to introduce you. Takes 10 minutes. Do that, then find another time to make sure you research the company that you're interested in. And third, just like make sure you apply. And so if you just give yourself these bite size, it doesn't feel overwhelming where you have to wait for like 3 weeks before graduation and you're just pounding the pavement. You would have done it in these sort of manageable goals, but you literally have to put it on your class like you're going for like Moffat's class or you're going for Lena Booth's class. Like schedule it, and then it becomes a weekly habit, and it'll get you to your goal faster. But it takes planning and it takes discipline, and that's hard when you have a million things to do. It's of course more fun to go watch rugby, but after 2 years, you want to make sure, in addition to rugby, you have a job. So I think I always tell people that the job search is a job in itself, so you have to be very intentional about it.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to open it up again to the group. We've still got a few minutes left here of Gbemi's time. So if anybody wants to take themselves off mute and ask a question, you can go ahead now.
Great, I nailed it. They have no questions.
Wow. I thought it was amazing. I thought you were right on. So
Oh, thank you. That was too kind. I'm sure people just need time to think about it. And once again, I'm pretty open. They can always send me an email afterwards. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll give it one last quick second if anybody wants to ask a question.
Hi, Gbemi.
Hi.
I'm Adam. Thank you for this presentation, and I do have one quick question for you.
Of course.
So when you're doing all of this, your research on your companies, what tools or techniques do you like to use to keep everything straight? Personally, I like to use Trello to keep things straight, but I wonder if you have other things that have really worked well for you for staying on top of, and you mentioned like set up alerts. Could
Right.
you expound a bit more on that? Thank you.
Yeah, and so in Google, so I'll preface this by saying when I went to school, we weren't as fancy with the apps and tools. So you probably have a ton more at your disposal. I just used basic Excel. I literally just had different tabs of like my different target companies, and then I would put a text by each one, and then I would move them from one spreadsheet to the next if I'd already reached out. So I basically kept a very basic, so you don't even have to have a fancy tool. It's whatever works for you, right? And so for me, I literally had Excel. I had a list of 30 companies, and then I had tabs going across that said LinkedIn, using at that point we used to call it thunder stalking on the MyMTV. So I would be like LinkedIn, MyMTV, personal contact. So I would just put an X by whichever of those I had done. And so that would be how I was keeping track. But I have to look into what tools are now available. I'm sure there's so many more, but this is almost 2 decades ago. So we just used Excel, which was our fancy tool at that time. But Google Alerts, most people just do this. So I oversee our PR and marketing in addition to all the other things I do at my company. And so it's important for me to know anytime our name is mentioned in the press or in the media. So you can set up Google Alerts to let you know when a name or comes up. So if there's a company you're looking for, if you set it up, anytime there's something in the news or in the media about them, then you'll get an alert from Google saying that this happened to that company. But I also find LinkedIn to be super useful. So I would just look up the company and start to follow them on LinkedIn, and they're doing all that research for you as well.
Thank you very much.